All right. As everyone's entering the meeting, I'll read the notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. In terms of accessibility, this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with some exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Ibu Kurayashi, well, I said that right, MPO staff at iquriashi@ctps.org or 857-702-3695 or via the chat box. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation. After roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves. Always remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or the reactions button in the toolbar. The chair will then call on participants. Please raise your hand via Zoom if you would like to use an AI note taker during this meeting. If you are on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. All right, with that, we can do the roll. David, do you want to go ahead and do it?
Yes, of course. Let us begin with MassDOT Seat 1 with Steve Wolfel.
Steve Wolfel, represent Interim Secretary and CEO of MassDOT, Phil Bang, here.
Thank you. MassDOT Seat 2. I'm just going to check. I will probably return. I think it was communicated that Michael O'Dowd might be C2, but I'll go to MassDOT Highway, please.
MassDOT Highway, John Romano here.
Good morning, John. Next is the MBTA.
Good morning, Sandy Johnson here representing the MBTA.
Good morning, Sandy. Welcome. Regional Transportation Authority's Metro West Transit Authority.
Good morning, Tyler Tarasi representing Administrator Jim Nee for the MWRTA. Present.
Good morning, Tyler. Next is Massport.
Hi, good morning. This is Sarah Lee representing Massport.
Good morning, Sarah. MAPC.
Good morning, Travis Pollock representing MAPC.
Welcome, Travis. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, Hannah Swilikowski, MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning. Advisory Council. Just going to do a quick check.
Yeah, this is Will Palmer from the Community Advisory Council. I believe Carl Alexander will be joining us shortly and speaking for us, but we are present. In fact, I think I see him in the waiting room.
Thank you, well. I see. I'll note that as well. Thank you, Will. City of Boston, Seat 1.
Good morning, Jen Rowe, representing the City of Boston, and Mayor Michelle Wu.
Welcome, Jen. City of Boston, Seat 2.
Good morning, Patrick Hoey, representing the City of Boston, and Mayor Michelle Wu.
Morning, Patrick. At-large City of Everett.
Good morning, Jay Monty, representing Mayor Van Campen and the City of Everett.
Hi, Jay. At-large City of Newton.
Ned Codd, representing Mayor Mark Laredo and the City of Newton.
Good morning, Ned, and apologies for the confusion earlier. At-large town of Arlington.
Good morning, Leonard Diggins, representing Select Board Chair Diane Mahan, Town of Arlington.
Welcome, Len. At-large town of Brookline.
Good morning, Erin Chute, representing Select Board Chair Bernard Green for the Town of Brookline.
Good morning, Erin. Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Tom Bent, City Assemble, representing Mayor Jake Wilson.
Welcome, Tom. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Lexington.
Megan Roach, representing Select Board Chair Jill Hay for the Magic Subregion.
Hello, Megan. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, representing Metro West in the City of Framingham, Mayor Charles Ziski.
Welcome, Dennis. North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Good morning, Erin Schaefer, City of Beverly, North Shore Task Force, representing Mayor Cahill.
Long time and welcome, Erin. North Suburban Planning Council, Town of Burlington.
Good morning, John Strauss, representing Select Board Chairman Micah Speyer, the Town of Burlington and the North Suburban Planning Council.
Good morning. South Shore Coalition, Town of Hull. Do a check. Not see Chris. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Rentham.
Rachel Benson, here representing Chairman Gallo, Town of Rentham, and the SWAP subregion.
Welcome, welcome. Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood.
Steve Olenoff, representing the Trick subregion, Town of Norwood.
Good morning and welcome. Do we have representation from the Federal Highway Administration today? And is there anyone on the roll I have not called?
David, I think Michael Dowd's on there. Dave, I think Michael Dowd's entered the meeting.
Good morning, everybody. Yep, my
Roger.
apologies for being late. Michael Dowd, Highway Division, MassDOT.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Michael. And with that, I turn it back to the chair. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to the Boston MPO meeting of February 19th. We'll move on to agenda item 2, which is the chair's report, which I believe I don't have one. So we can move right to agenda number 3, which is the executive director's report. And I believe Annette's filling in. So Annette, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Annette Dempscher, Director of Policy and Planning, and I'm substituting for Tegan Tyke during today's meeting. Next slide, please. I'll start by sharing some announcements about upcoming meetings, then I'll provide an overview of today's agenda, and finally provide some information about our next meeting. Next slide, please. I have 2 announcements about upcoming meetings. First, I'd like to inform you that we anticipate that the March 5th and March 19th meetings will be longer than usual, as we will be working on the development of the federal fiscal years 2027 to 2031 Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP. We're currently estimating that they will run between 2.5 and 3 hours, so just giving you advance notice of that to make time on your schedules. And then second, I'd like to give you advance notice that we're currently planning the April 2nd MPO meeting as an in-person meeting with a hybrid option. At that meeting, we'll be discussing and finalizing the federal fiscal years 2027 to 2031 TIP program of projects. We're in the process right now of determining a location for this meeting, which will likely be in downtown Boston. So stay tuned and we'll update you as soon as we have more information. But I'm asking you to please take a moment now to save this date and time in your calendars for that meeting. Next slide, please. And now for today's agenda, we have 2 items. The first is about open meeting law compliance for MPO committees. Dave Hong will provide an overview of some strategies and protocols for MPO meetings to help avoid inadvertent violations of Massachusetts open meeting law, and will ask the board to vote to adopt those measures. And second, Ethan Lapointe will provide an overview of funding and project readiness information that will be utilized to develop the foundation for the federal fiscal years 2027 to 31 TIP program of projects. This presentation will focus on how current TIP projects perform alongside the MPO's recently revised project programming and readiness guidelines. Please note that the board will not be asked to vote on the readiness baseline that Ethan presents today. It's for informational purposes only to provide a foundation for future discussions and decisions made by this board in upcoming MPO meetings. Next slide, please. And finally, our next meeting will be March 5th. And the tentative schedule currently includes a presentation and vote to approve the transit asset management performance targets, further development of the federal fiscal years 2027 to 2031 TIP, including project scoring and rescoring, a presentation and request for endorsement of the Vision Zero Action Plan, and presentations by the Metro West Regional Transit Authority and Cape Ann Transportation Authority of their capital investment plans. And with that, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Annette. Anyone have any questions for Annette? All right, seeing none, why don't we get into it? So we move to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 4, public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the MPO today? I don't see any. David, are you seeing anybody?
Thank you for the question. I do not see anyone, Mr. Chair.
All right. All right. Anyone for public comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to the agenda 5, which is committee chairs report. Does any committee chairs have anything to report? Jen, go ahead. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to report that the next TIP process engagement and readiness committee meeting is scheduled for this coming Wednesday, the 25th at 3. We're going to use that time to review and discuss areas where the board will be required to act to maintain fiscal constraint, as well as our overall objectives in developing the program of projects. We'll also review the results from project scoring and rescoring that staff undertook this year. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Jen? Thank you, Jen. Anything from ANF, Hannah? All right. Any other chairs? All right. I think we can move on to the next agenda item then. Agenda item 6 is the Community Advisory Council report. Whoever's going to do that, why don't you take it away?
I joined just as Will clocked in for the Community Advisory Council, so I'm here as well. Good to see you. And so for today's report, just to let you know, we met this past or on Monday, February 9th. Wow, time flies. If in case you missed it, we had a lively discussion on options for the discrete studies to be included in federal fiscal year 2027 UPWP. There was overall various committee member interest for all of the study proposals. There was particular enthusiasm for further analysis of roadway pricing policies and also ways that the MBO activities can support transit-oriented development in the region. We look forward to sharing more of the Advisory Council's input on the discrete studies at the next UPWP committee meeting, be there or be square. And then our following Community Advisory Council meeting is on Monday, March 9th at 2 o'clock, where we'll be discussing the MPO's public engagement plan. And as always, you're welcome to attend to see the type of discussion and engagement that goes on during those meetings. Thank you so much.
Any questions for Carl? Seeing none, thank you, Carl. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is our first action item, which is potential approval for the February 5th meeting minutes. Can I get a motion second to approve? Jen?
Jen Rowe, I will motion to approve the February 5th meeting minutes.
Megan?
Megan Roach, I will second that motion.
All right, any changes to the minutes or comments? Seeing none, David, you want to read the roll?
Yes, I will call the roll, beginning with Steve Wolfel.
Yes.
Mike O'Dowd. Pardon me, Michael O'Dowd.
Yes. Yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Tyler Tarasi.
Tyler Tarasi, yes.
Sarah Lee.
I did not attend, so I'll abstain.
Roger. Travis Pollock.
Travis Pollock abstain, did not attend.
Understood. Thank you. Hannah Slitwikowski.
Hannah Swilakowski, yes.
Carl Alexander.
Yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Patrick Hoey.
Patrick Hoey, yes.
Jay Monty.
Monty, yes.
Ned Codd.
Ned Codd, yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Aaron Shute.
Shoot, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Megan Roach.
Megan Roach, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Aaron Schaefer.
Aaron Schaefer, yes.
John Strauss.
John Strauss, yes.
Rachel Benson.
Yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
The motion carries, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, everybody. We can now move to agenda item 8, which is the open meeting law compliance for MPO committees. And David, this is you. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Dave Hong, and I serve as the manager of MPO activities. I have come before the board today to present on the topic of open meeting law, or OML, compliance at MPO committee meetings. This presentation, drawing on the memo that was posted, will propose strategies and protocols designed to help avoid inadvertent violations of OML at committee meetings while simultaneously aiming to preserve the participatory spirit in which these committees were created. At the end of this session, I will ask the board to vote to adopt these measures and the corresponding amendments to the MPO operations plan. If we could please go to the next slide. And then the next. To provide some background, last fall, an MPO member asked staff what happens when there is more than half of the MPO board present at a committee meeting within the context of open meeting law. Staff subsequently took this question to explore what risk the board was exposed to, consulting closely with MPO's legal counsel, namely Marjorie Weinberger, who is present here today. Thank you for joining us, Margie, and developed the protocols described in the posted memo. Council noted that the major risk is posed by the prospect of unlawful deliberation. If we can move to the next slide. How unlawful deliberation can occur. It can occur when a quorum of the board deliberates outside a properly noticed board meeting. OML defines quorum as a simple majority. So in our case, this is 12 members. For this reason, participation in any committee is limited to 11 or fewer board representatives to ensure that committees remain distinct from the full board. Next slide. In light of this, the proposed protocols that we're bringing forward is that given the board has 2 committees currently with 11 members, we were advised to take proactive measures to remain fully compliant. As this requires care and diligence by all board members, committee chairs, and MPO staff. So the proposed measures are as follows. Committee chairs are responsible for ensuring that participation by board members does not reach or exceed a quorum of the full MPO board. MPO staff are prepared to actively assist committee chairs. For committees that have reached maximum membership, board members who are not members of the specific committee may still attend, but in an observer-only capacity. What this means, we'll see on the next slide, please. To avoid unlawful deliberation, these observers must remain silent and should not be recognized by the committee chair for comments, questions, or opinions during these committee meetings. They will keep cameras off, microphones muted, and refrain from using reactions, hand-raising features, or the meeting chat. Next slide. For committees that have reached 11 members, Today, this is the TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee, or TIPPER, and the UPWP Committee. Any board member or entity invited to the committee to present must be represented by personnel who do not serve in an MPO board representative, designee, or alternate role. What makes this hopefully clear is an example. So for example, if there is a TIPPER committee taking place, as Annette had mentioned in a few weeks, and a municipality, MBTA, or RTA that sits on the board is invited to share details about a project that community members are interested to hear. The presenter should be a speaker who does not hold an official MPO role. That would add to the number of committee members, or sorry, to the number of members that may lead to a quorum. Finally, we note that committee chairs should consult with MPO staff to seek legal counsel whenever a potential quorum issue or procedural uncertainty may arise. If we go to the next slide. To make this easier for committee chairs, MPO staff are fully ready to work closely with them to work through the details of these protocols, as well as to provide close support during every single meeting. Margie and I are happy to take questions at the discretion of the chair today, and thereafter request that the board vote to approve the protocols described in the posted memo and the corresponding amendments to the MPO operations plan. Thank you to the board, and I will turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, David. Anyone have any questions for David? Does someone want to make a motion, a second, to adopt this? John, and then Leonard, and Jen. Are these questions or motions?
This is a question.
All right, go ahead, John.
Thanks very much, Steve. The question I had, which I wanted to address to Margie, was since the committee is only going to be voting on a recommendation, what is the exact nature of the quorum issue that comes up? Because the recommendation is going to be, again, voted on by us as a board.
Because even the recommendation is considered a deliberation when you have a quorum present. So it is something that will be taken up before you. And so you're having you will be having a deliberation by participating in it during the meeting. The open meeting law can be incredibly awkward. It's not meant to prevent you personally from being able, in your individual capacities, from being able to speak at things. But it is meant to make sure that public deliberation in public settings are always, when you have a quorum present, allowing for full open deliberation and transparency in front of the public. And if you have a quorum at a committee meeting where the issues are going to be coming before you anyway, these are deliberative issues that will come before you as a public body. And therefore, my recommendation legally is to abstain from communication during a committee meeting where something will be coming before you, because it would be considered deliberation. Does that make sense, John?
No, I understand that completely, because I'm also on the Board of Registrars of the town of Burlington. So we bounce up against this open meeting stuff quite a bit through, and all other departments of town run into this kind of thing too. The question that I had was in other words, you're not actually, if you understand me, you're having it. Are you saying that because we're having this discussion as a quorum, this is going to be considered a private discussion? Like if I was, emailing somebody else, which is what that open meeting law is, it really seems to be one of the big factors of that. Or because you're out in the open, the public can come in and see the meeting. So it's not like it's hidden, or it's not like it's some kind of communications, not in a medium that's accessible to the public. So that's my question. It doesn't seem like.
The problem is you haven't been noticed as a meeting for purposes of your main, board. And so since you didn't set it up as an open meeting of the board, then you would not be able to deliberate in another forum because you didn't notice it as your own forum. So that triggers the issue.
I see what you're saying. So because there's a quorum present now, it's considered to be a board meeting, so now we have to go. I
I
get it.
have seen some workarounds in communities where they put up notice of their attendance at another public meeting so that they get around that. I don't know that that actually fixes the problem or just creates another notice requirement.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying now. So when we establish a quorum, then that's considered to be a public meeting. We have to give notice and so forth,
Yeah.
even though we're not actually reaching any really kind of substantive decision. Okay.
The possibility of deliberation now exists, and any that could occur was not part of an open meeting that you
Right.
created.
Right. I get it. Okay. Thanks very much.
Sure.
John, Steve, and then Tyler, and then Leonard.
Steve Olaf, what happens when there's more than one member of a given seat present at a committee meeting? Can both speak?
Well, the thing is, if you created a quorum by the single member who's authorized to speak and not their delegate, if you've reached quorum, the delegate doesn't count to increase your quorum number because technically you are one seat regardless of how many members are there. So you're not triggering quorum. But it creates an awkward situation. If you've reached quorum, now you have both members of the seat who could be speaking as well. You still, whenever you reach quorum, you trigger the possibility of deliberation without having properly noticed the meeting and creating minutes for that meeting. And that's where the problem arises. It's not that you have more than one member who holds the seat because they kind of share it as, representative and delegate. That doesn't trigger the quorum problem. It's just another awkward moment. But once you reach quorum, that's when the problem is triggered. And that's what this guidance is supposed to prevent from happening.
Right, but it otherwise sounds like you both can speak. As long as you don't speak.
So long as you don't have, you've triggered a quorum, that's when you have problems. And of course, you can always speak in your individual capacity as a citizen. You just say, I'm here in my individual
Okay.
capacity as a citizen. Yes.
I do that often. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Steve.
All right, Tyler, Leonard, and then Ned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering about how this would apply to public comment periods. Would we, if there's a threat of a quorum being present, would we be able to speak during public comment, or would our participation have to be, completely non-existent, essentially?
So if you're going to be speaking as a member and you have quorum present, I would refrain from doing so.
Good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
But yeah, I mean, with your comment before, though, like speaking as an individual citizen, could that be, or something, or would it just be refrained completely?
So the open meeting law is never supposed to squash your ability to speak as an individual.
Got it. Okay.
But you always have to say, I'm speaking in my individual capacity, not representing, the board, not representing the MWRTA, for example. I'm speaking as Tyler on my own behalf. So you always have to kind of set that plane out there.
Understood. Thank you.
Leonard, and then Ned.
Thank you,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So how does this apply to email?
Well, if you're emailing or using social media during the meeting, that could be considered deliberation outside public view. If you're doing it to one another.
Right. So I was thinking within the context of the meeting, because when on the select board meeting, we did not communicate with all members through email at all. I mean, we limited to being less than a quorum. I'm asking, does that apply to this group also?
Yes, it does.
Okay, just to make that clear. Okay, thank you.
Ned.
Thanks. So I wanted to get back a little bit to try to clarify the point that Marjorie was making with Steve Olenoff a minute ago. So if there is a committee that say an alternate would like to speak to, then the alternate can speak to a committee that seat is represented on, because it doesn't increase the number of seats represented in the quorum.
Yes. But if the alternate speaks or the delegate speaks and there is quorum, you have a problem. That's where the problem is. It's always
Right, but
when you have quorum.
Right. If you have a committee that does not include a quorum and your seat is represented on it, then you're not adding to the number of seats. But if your seat is not represented, then you are adding to the number of seats.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ned.
Tyler, do you have another question?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't lower my hand. Sorry
All right.
about that.
Just
I think
wanted
it's
to
all
check.
set now.
Jen?
Thank you. Yeah, just adding one more kind of iteration to clarify, leaving off where Ned was, which is that if there is an entity like the City of Boston or MassDOT with multiple representatives on the board, is my assumption that if we're at quorum, we cannot have a second person who is designated as an alternate or representative, but we could have someone else
Separate and
speak on
apart.
behalf of the city.
He does not hold a seat. That's correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Other questions? All right. Anyone want to make a motion and a second to approve? Jen?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve the protocols in the posted memo and the corresponding amendments to the MPO operations plan. And I'd like to thank Dave, Marjorie, others in MPO staff and APC who've found a way forward for us to kind of satisfy open meeting law and also allow the committees to continue engaging in important dialogue, debate, and negotiation that helps facilitate our board decisions.
Leonard?
That was an impressive motion, Ms. Rowe, and I happily second it.
All right. Last call. Any questions for Marjorie or David or anyone else on this? All right. First of all, Marjorie, thank you. Now we'll move to the roll call. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Marjorie, and thank you to everyone on the board. I will start with Steve Wolfel.
Yes.
Michael O'Dowd.
Yes.
John Romano.
John Romano, yes.
Sandy Johnston.
Sandy Johnston, yes.
Tyler Tarasi.
Tyler Tarasi, yes.
Sarah Lee.
Sarah Lee, yes.
Travis Pollock.
Travis Pollock, yes.
Hannah Switlikowski.
Hannah Switlikowski, yes.
Thank you. Carl Alexander.
Carl Alexander, yes.
Jen Rowe.
Jen Rowe, yes.
Patrick Hoey.
Patrick Hoey, yes.
Jay Monty.
Jay Monty, yes.
Ned Codd.
Ned Codd, yes.
Len Diggins.
Diggins, yes.
Aaron Shute.
And shoot, yes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, yes.
Megan Roach.
Megan Roach, yes.
Dennis Giambetti.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Aaron Schaefer.
Aaron Schaefer, yes.
John Strauss.
John Strauss, yes.
Rachel Benson.
Yes.
Steve Olenoff.
Steve Olenoff, yes.
Motion carries, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, everyone. Again, thank you, David, and thank you, Marjorie. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 9, which is the quarterly readiness update, tip readiness days, readiness and scenarios. And it's Ethan and Adriana, so why don't you take it away?
Right, I'm going to get started on this one. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. And the following one, thank you. I'm going to discuss today's meeting materials, and then I'm going to hand it over to Ethan for a review of the guidelines that influence this readiness baseline, including the 2021 cost policy and the recent readiness policy. And then although 2026 is not included in the upcoming tip, We will also discuss changes to that year because of the implications on the early years of the TIP in development. Then we'll go through project delays by federal fiscal year, and then we'll highlight major cost increases that were not included in the readiness baseline. Lastly, we'll discuss next steps. Next slide, please. On the MPO meeting calendar, you can find the readiness baseline. And as a reminder, this is not a programming scenario. This is just focused on readiness, not fiscal constraint. Next slide, please. Here are the programming guidelines for each federal fiscal year as laid out in the readiness policy. For 2027, a 100% submission is required. 2028 needs a 75% with comments or a combined 75 and 100% submission. For 2029, a 25% design public hearing, which can be analogous to a 25% approval, is required. For 2030, a 25% submission with comments is necessary. And lastly, in 2031, a pre-25% submission is required. Next slide, please. Then we have a review of the guidelines from the 2021 project cost policy. So this policy established two thresholds where if either were surpassed, further review by the MPO board would be required. These thresholds are, first, a cost increase of 25% of project cost or more. So that could be an $8 million project increasing by $2 million or more, or any increase beyond $2.5 million. Next slide, please. The baseline does not automatically include cost increases that surpass these thresholds, with two exceptions. First, projects funded in 2026, where the cost increases are subject to approval via TIP amendment, or inflation adjustments driven by delays. Because MassDOT assumes the 4% that is delayed by 3 years would have a cost increase of $3 million. And despite surpassing that 25%, despite surpassing that 2.5 million cost threshold, it is still included in the readiness baseline. Next slide, please. The status of each project is color-coded by delay status. No shading indicates that there is no programming year change. Red shading indicates a project delay. Gray shading indicates either project deactivation by the proponent or a delay beyond 2031, given that a project does not meet the readiness requirements for 2031. Next slide, please. Each project contains 3 main categories of information. First, the delay information, if applicable. So this would comprise the initial TIP year, the current programming year or years, the new programming year or years, and the total years delayed. Next, cost information, which includes the latest cost estimate, which you might find on MassDOT's project information site, and the current programming amount. Lastly, risk factors. This includes, if applicable, the next design stage for the project to meet by the time of TIP development for the project to remain in the proposed fiscal year. This is mostly relevant for projects that, say, are scheduled to reach a design milestone by April, but have not yet done so. It also includes design status and date of last update on MassDOT's project info site, the year since the last design milestone, the risk for the proposed federal fiscal year, and the explanation for that risk. Next slide, please. In summation, the readiness baseline applies the MPO's approved policies for readiness and cost to all regionally prioritized projects. What this means is that the cost increases that surpass cost policy thresholds are not automatically included, and that each project is programmed in the year determined by the readiness policy. Next slide, please. Last thing before I turn it over to Ethan. The other document in the meeting materials pertaining to this presentation is the cost increase appendix. This lists the 5 projects with either or both a cost increase of over 2.5 million and a cost increase of over 25%. Cost increases not included in the readiness baseline total to about $61.6 million. Next slide, please, and I'll pass it over to Ethan.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Lapointe. I am a senior transportation planner with MPO staff working on the TIP. For today's presentation, I'll just kind of provide a quick reminder on how this presentation is structured. We're going to cover delays in federal fiscal year 2026 first, given that is the active program for this current advertising year. And then once we go through 2026, we'll then move through all of the projects that are included in later years of this next development tip. So without further ado, I want to go on to the next slide and just cover the 5 projects that are not in need of a delay based on the current advertising year. These projects in order are the Stratton School Improvements Project in the town of Arlington, which advertised for bids in December. The Linfield Rail Trail Construction Phase 1, which is at plan specifications and estimates. The Medford Shared Use Path connection at Route 28 Wellington Underpass, which is on its 4th plan specs and estimates resubmission. I will also note this is the first of the projects that Adriana mentioned earlier in the introduction that has an increase beyond the MPO's project cost policy thresholds. Because this is a federal fiscal year 2026 project, it will be subject to a TIP amendment later down the line. I'll have a point later in the presentation to talk about when that amendment might come before the board, but just noting that currently the increase is only captured within the scenario for these 26 projects, though we just wanted to list the total increase in original number here. This is also the case for the next project, the multi-use path construction for Independence Greenway at I-95 Route 1 in Peabody. This is also at PS&E on a third resubmission or third submission for that, with an increase from 19.1 million to 23.25 million. And then the 5th project that will remain in federal fiscal year 2026 for advertising is the intersection improvements at Boston Post Road and Wellesley Street in the town of Weston, which has had a PS&E submission since April 2025. If we move on to the next slide, this takes us into projects that are recommended to move into federal fiscal year 2027 or a later year out of the current advertising year. Just moving in alphabetical order here, the first one is the Belmont Community Path Mass Central Rail Trail Phase 1 project. The project is at 100% design with comments, which is consistent with the MPO's adopted guidelines for federal fiscal year 2027 funding. I will note that this project also has a cost increase, as has been previously presented, from $27.3 million to $48.93 million. I'll also note here, for example, that MPO staff are continuing to have discussions with MassDOT staff around other programming strategies that may be implemented and discussed as well in future MPO meetings, not only about these cost increases, but how, for example, in this project's case, differences between the readiness estimates or recommendations MassDOT may provide to readiness days may stack up or be balanced against the MPO's own readiness guidelines. For example, MassDOT's readiness days recommendation for this project still hold it in federal fiscal year 2026. Our readiness guidelines would propose 2027, particularly given the elevated cost of the project. Moving on, though, while we're still in the 26 section here into the improvements on Boylston Street, City of Boston, this project is only at a 25% design resubmission. That is from 2021. There is another 25% design in the works as well, with further modifications to reflect limits changes. As a result, is being pushed to federal fiscal 2031 under the guidelines. For the improvements on Route 3A from Otis Street Cole Road in the town of Hingham, this project is at 100% design as of December. The project is proposed to move to federal fiscal year 2027. And in the city of Woburn, the intersection reconstruction at Route 3, Bedford Road, and South Bedford Street is still currently only at 75% design. It is proposed to move to federal fiscal year 2027. However, the project must submit a 100% design by March for a delay to 27. If it does not submit that 100% design, the readiness guidelines would prescribe federal fiscal 28 for the best fit programming year. If we move on to the next slide, again, this is just the federal fiscal year 26 program, and delays out of the active advertising year for the TIP would require an amendment to the federal fiscal year's 2026 30 TIP to address unprogrammed balances. The 4 projects that I have just mentioned, when delayed out of federal fiscal 2026, leave a unprogrammed balance of about $57.54 million, which will be addressed in future actions. Something to note is that on March 5th, at that upcoming MPO meeting, staff are going to present project scoring results, including projects that staff actively solicited from partners at MassDOT, the MBTA, Metro West Regional Transit Authority, and Cape Ann Transportation Authority, and other partners as well that could utilize this funding. I'll also note then that after that March 5th presentation to the board on scoring, staff are tentatively looking to request a vote to release an amendment for public comment at the March 19th MPO meeting. So that's the federal fiscal year 2026 program update. If we move on to the next slide, we'll then move into federal fiscal years 2027-31. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So the TIP is a 5-year capital program that is rolling between each of the 5 federal fiscal years. What this means is that the projects that are in the current 2026-30 program, by and large, move forward into the 2027-31 program. Under the current program for 2026-30, there are 34 projects that MPO staff would classify as what we call core investment projects. These are projects that we define as construction projects that follow a MassDOT design process, and that list therefore does not include projects that the MPO is funding for design costs, transit projects that are being driven by either the MBTA, Metro West, or Cape Ann Transportation Authority, the bike share projects, and community connections projects, and any set aside. So again, there are 34 projects here. The chart that's shown on screen shows how those projects, those 34, are currently distributed across each of the 5 federal fiscal years of the 2026 to 2030 program. And I'll note this is their first federal fiscal year of programming, so advanced construction projects that appear across multiple years only appear in that first year. They don't appear multiple times. That's part of why the fiscal 2030 balance is so low compared to other years. I'll note, just as kind of a summary of what is on this chart, the majority of the projects that are in the TIP, or the current TIP, are concentrated in the nearer term years. And if we go on the next slide, I'll just pause for a quick second to note that this is a just more visible part of the same chart from that prior slide. Again, we're looking at projects about anywhere ranging from 7 to 9 between federal fiscal years 2026 and 2029. What I will note, though, before we really get into the delays on the next slide, is that we do have a comparison analysis showing, if we can actually go on to that next slide, please, sorry, that shows how the current program of projects for federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 compares against the proposed readiness baseline being presented during this MPO meeting. So this chart, which is going to appear later in the presentation after we talk about the specific drivers, shows in the furthest left column for each federal fiscal year that current bar chart for that tip that I showed. There's then a second chart that shows the readiness baseline and the allocation of projects in each of the federal fiscal years as a combo chart, including one bar showing the projects that are staying in that year that were not delayed, and also a second bar which shows using a hash mark projects that are now in that year because they were delayed. So for example, we just talked about the federal fiscal year 26 program. It is starting at 9 projects. 4 of those are proposed for delay, and therefore the second bar now shows only 5 projects remaining in that year. Again, though, I'm now going to move into later federal fiscal years, and we're going to come back to this chart later, but just wanted to mention that now so folks can digest it later. So I'm actually going to start, if we can go on to the next slide, by covering the projects that do not require a delay. These 4 projects are the intersection improvements at Willard Street and Richard E. Drive in the city of Quincy, which is at 100% design, therefore it will stay in federal fiscal 27. Excuse me. In federal fiscal year 2029, the bike path construction of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in Sudbury, which is at 25% design with a design public hearing. Therefore, it's proposed to stay in fiscal 29. The Park and Pearl Street reconstruction in the city of Chelsea, which is at a 25% design submission and received by MassDOT, not only proposed to stay in fiscal 2030, but I also want to note that this project is one of the few that actually saw a somewhat sizable cost decrease from $12.12 million to $10.8 million as a result of that 25%, and also the Lebanon Street Improvement Project in federal fiscal year 2030 in the city of Melrose. And I will note as well, while we're here, that the Park and Pearl Street reconstruction and the Lebanon Street Improvement projects are the only 2 projects in federal fiscal year 2030 under the current program. So there are no projects that are currently in 2030 that are being proposed to be delayed out of 2030. As far as projects that are potentially available to or would require a delay to support their best fit advertising year, though, if we start on the next slide, this will take us into the federal fiscal year 2027 program. This first project is the bridge preservation of Cambridge Street over MBTA, Amtrak, and CSX tracks in Charlestown and specifically in the city of Boston. This project is at a 25% design submission from October 2025. It's therefore being proposed under the readiness guidelines to be delayed to federal fiscal year 2030. Now, I will note at next week's TIP process engagement readiness committee meeting, we're going to provide more opportunity to discuss specific projects in more detail. This is one of those projects as well where there is a possibility for an earlier advertising year than the readiness guidelines, as the proposed scope of work is more straightforward or simple than the average MPO funded roadway project that determined those guidelines. And we've also heard confirmation from both the city and also supporting information from MassDOT about that. I will note as well, though, this project has also seen a cost increase as a result of that 25% that is beyond the MPO's approved cost policy threshold. So we are likely to discuss this project more in future MPO meetings and also TIP committee meetings, but this is one of those examples of a project that the proposed readiness guidelines year may not fully align with the project's best fit advertising year. With that being said, however, for other projects currently in federal fiscal 27, the next is the reconstruction of Beecham Street in the city of Everett, which is at a 25% comments submission that is being proposed for fiscal 2030, and the intersection improvements at Route 1 University Avenue in the town of Norwood, which is proposed for a move to federal fiscal 29. Now, I will note this project does have a 25% resubmission. However, it needs a new 25% submission, and there is a design public hearing for the 25% scheduled for the project on March 26, 2026. Thus why it's proposed for fiscal 29. What I will note, however, is that there is a strong likelihood that the cost estimate for this project of $27.6 million is likely to change following that design public hearing towards the end of March. This cost estimate has largely held constant for a few years now on this project. We can go on to the next slide just to wrap up as far as the federal fiscal 27 projects. The Salem Boston Street Improvements project is currently proposed to be delayed to federal fiscal 28 out of 27, as it is only at a 75% submission. And the McGrath Boulevard construction project in the city of Somerville is proposed under MPO funding to move to federal fiscal year 2028, as it is at a 25% submission. Now, I will note, similar case here as well, MassDOT's internal readiness guidelines, our internal advertising dates, show a 2027 advertising date. And I'll also note that the McGrath Boulevard project has a federal discretionary grant that requires obligation, and namely the project to advertise in federal fiscal year 2027. Based on coordination between MPO staff and MassDOT around this, there is still the possibility to utilize that federal discretionary funding, potentially statewide participation, so that this project would still advertise in federal fiscal year 2027, but MPO funding would not be provided in federal fiscal year 2027. This would allow the project to advertise on its current pace without requiring an exception to the MPO's approved readiness or cost guidelines in order to do so. I'll also note as well on the next slide, there are two more projects. These are projects that are proposed for full removal from federal fiscal year 2027. The first one, if we can go on to that next slide, please, is one that has been brought to the MPO board previously. This was the resurfacing and related work on Central and South Main Streets in the town of Ipswich. Back on September 2025, the town's select board submitted a letter to MassDOT noting that the town was no longer going to move forward with designing the project, so therefore the project is being removed. The rehabilitation of Route 16 from Route 109 to Beaver Street in the town of Milford is also proposed for a deactivation and removal, as the project was parts of the project scope were recently addressed by maintenance work conducted by MassDOT. There is a possibility, however, that a subsequent and smaller project may emerge to address other safety improvements in the project area that were not addressed by that original safety contract. However, that project would be done under a different project number and is not currently proposed for programming on this tip. This then takes us on the next slide into the 2028 program. Again, moving in alphabetical order here, the first project is the rehabilitation of Washington Street in the town of Brookline, which is at a 25% comment stage as of this past January. As of this January, I should say. This project is now proposed for a federal fiscal year 2030 year. I will note as well, the project has also seen a cost increase as a result of the 25% submission from $27.96 million to $39.02 million. The large portion of that is contingency accounts. The rehabilitation of Essex Street in the city of Lynn is at a 25% design submission dated from September 2025, also proposed to move to 2030 as a result, and has also seen a cost increase from 23.57 million to 33.81 million. The Main Street reconstruction project in the town of Wakefield is at a pre-25% submission stage and is therefore proposed to move to a federal fiscal year 2031 out of 2028. And the reconstruction of Route 30 in the town of Weston is at a 25% design public hearing and is slated for federal fiscal year 2029 as a result. I will also note in this case, part of the delay on the project from 75 is that the town was considering submitting a revision to their 25% design for a new cost cross section on the project, though the town now seems to be sticking with that cross section and moving once again back towards 75 instead of restarting the 25 process. And the last project is the reconstruction of Canton Street to University Drive in Westwood. This project is at a 25% design public hearing from September 2023. This is moving out of 28 to 29. I will note there's been a couple tweaks to the project in terms of overall limits from what was originally approved around a bridge. That is reflected in its most recent milestone of a project review committee resubmission from December 2025, though the original design public hearing on the project still holds true for the scope. If we can go on to the next slide, please. We have two further projects proposed for removal from fiscal year 2028 and removal from the TIP entirely. The first is the rehabilitation rail crossing improvements on Cherry Street in the town of Ashland. This project has had a 25% comment submission, though that submission was done in August of 2020. The project is being reevaluated due to a fatality that occurred at the grade crossing a few years ago, which has greatly reduced the likelihood of obtaining Federal Railroad Administration quiet zone approval, which was the primary project objective. Also, due to design delays on the project lost earmark funding, which was also enabling advancement of project development, both for construction and design. There was also a revised 25% submission that was due back in July 10th, 2024, though that revised 25% still has not yet been received. As a result, staff are proposing to remove this project, which is also consistent with MassDOT's readiness recommendations as well. The second project is the Cochituate Rail Trail extension from the MBTA station to Mechanic Street with additional connections to Natick Center along Main Street. This project had a 25% design submission back in 2024 when the town applied for funding to the MPO, or I should say 2023, when the town initially applied for funding on the TIP. However, the currently proposed design alignment for the project has been deemed to be very unlikely to be constructed due to concerns around structural and geotechnical issues. MassDOT has therefore advised the town of Natick to go all the way back to the feasibility and alternatives analysis stage on the project. As a result, this project can no longer abide by the MPO's proposed readiness guidelines as it has to start design all the way back at initial stages. I will note that the town is applying for Mass Trails grant funding to conduct the feasibility and alternatives analysis, and MPO staff are coordinating with town staff to identify the best programming year for a potential award of TIP design funding. Staff received a letter from the town of Natick yesterday formally requesting that the board consider that the town for design funding in this TIP development cycle. Again, to support the newly proposed alignment should they be able to move forward with further feasibility work under a Mass Trails grant. We can go on to the next slide. This then takes us to 2029 projects. The first project is the roadway rehabilitation of Route 126 in the town of Bellingham, proposed to move from 2029 to 2031 based on a pre-25% design submission. City of Boston, with the reconstruction of Rutherford Avenue, has a 25% design resubmission. However, the city is moving towards a new 25%. Therefore, it's proposed for 2031, as it is not yet at that new 25%. There were 25% comments that were required for March 2020 by this March to hold 2030. That new 25% is likely not coming in until May 2026, and as a result, that is why the 2031 year is proposed here. I will note as well that the city has already been conducting some initial public hearings on the project as well, despite that 25% not being in yet, so the project is still moving forward. The third project is the rehabilitation of Western Avenue in the city of Lynn, which is at a 25% comment stage based on this past December. As a result of the 25% design submission that this project provided, and this was also covered in prior meetings of the TIP committee and this board, the project cost is increasing from $45.9 million to $68.19 million. I will also note here, and again, we can discuss this in future meetings, that while this project's cost exceeds the MPO's TIP project cost policy thresholds, this is a project that utilizes advanced construction in the TIP, meaning it is funded across multiple federal fiscal years. Given the project now has a start year of federal fiscal year 2030, the readiness scenario does not include this cost increase. And regardless, that cost increase would likely be captured in federal fiscal year 2032 based on the project's construction timeline. So even as a result, this cost increase would likely not be factored in to this year's TIP development scenarios, though it may still be considered or approved by the board as part of discussions around those scenarios. We also have two more projects for federal fiscal 29 on the next slide. The first being the Spot Pond Brook Greenway project in the city of Malden, proposed for federal fiscal year 2030, based on a 25% submission from August, though some tweaks to the project's overall limits that were reflected in a project review committee resubmission from December 2025, and the roadway intersection improvements at Woburn Common in the city of Woburn. This project is proposed for 2031 as there is a pre-25% submission. There was a 25% submission due on January 27th, though that was delayed. The pre-25% over the shoulder was also expected in January 2026. So we are still utilizing the project's current project info estimate, which was review committee approval back in December 2019. We are still waiting on those submissions to come in. We also have two more projects on the next slide proposed for removal from the TIP. The first is the Argilla Road roadway reconstruction project in the town of Ipswich. This project does not currently have design funding identified for it to continue advancing the project to the pre-25% design stage. The last completed task for the project was the preparation, but not submittal of a MassDOT scoping checklist back in August 2025. Again, the project does not currently have design funding identified to keep the project moving forward and is not likely to make that pre-25 submission for it to be continued to be included in the TIP. Second project is the rail trail construction project in the town of Swampscott. This project is not going to make a pre-25% design submission by March 2026 either. It is still holding a project review committee approval timeline from December 2019. I'll also note that given experience with other similar rail projects, MassDOT and MPO staff are also expecting a significant cost increase on the project's construction costs beyond that December 2019 estimate. So the current estimate's $8.6 million. Other similar projects generally indicate a much higher amount due to the project's lack of design progress consistent with the MPO's guidelines and that cost risk. Both parties are recommending removal from the current program until further information is provided. With that, if we can go on to the next slide, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that there were no projects proposed for removal from 2030. What this chart is showing, which I showed earlier in the presentation, is that while the current program of projects for 2026 to 30 concentrates most of the projects in the earlier years of the TIP, the proposed readiness baseline here concentrates most of the projects in the later years of the TIP as they are not at sufficient readiness thresholds, or at least in design development, to successfully advertise in their current program years. The majority of delays are being concentrated specifically in pushing projects to federal fiscal year 2030, as most projects are remaining and continue to remain in this 25% design comments stage. This is reflected in the bars, as again, I'll mention just for the color coding. The dark navy blue, which is on the left side of each federal fiscal year, shows the current program, and the sort of olive drab color that is a solid color shows the projects that are still continuing in that year, not delayed. The drab hash mark color is showing projects that have been delayed into that year. If we go on to the next slide, I'll just kind of take us back to where we started on this overview. So of those 34 projects that I mentioned at the start that are currently core investment projects in the current program, 9 of them do not require a delay. 19 of them require a delay between federal fiscal years 2027 and 31, and 6 of those projects are either being deactivated or delayed beyond 2031, functionally removing them from the program. I'll note on the next slide that 23 projects are going to carry from the 2026 to 30 TIP. So of those 34 projects I mentioned, 5 of the 9 that are not going to require a delay are in federal fiscal year 2026. So they're going to successfully advertise, and there's 6 projects that aren't going to advertise between 2030 before 2031. The punchline of this is that due to financial issues, which I'm going to get to on the upcoming slides, or a lack of funding availability, which I'll get to on upcoming slides, it is highly unlikely that the next development tip is going to fund more municipal proponent projects than the current tip. So there are 23 being carried forward, down from 34. Due to funding availability, we are not likely to fund additional projects. There will be fewer projects in this upcoming tip than the current one, or I should say municipal proponent projects. More information on this funding balance, if we go on to the next slide and the one after that, please. This is information that was presented at the previous MPO meeting based on the allocation of MPO target funding identified during the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies, or MARPA meeting. The total available funding between federal fiscal years 2026 and 31 is around $910.8 million. Again, we're including 26 in there. The next program only covers 27 to 2031. This ranges in total funding availability between $153.1 million and $159.2 million. If we go on to the next slide, this is that same table, but shows the baseline programming amount following these proposed changes to project programming years as discussed in this presentation. So in federal fiscal year 2027, due to widespread delays of projects out of that year, we're looking at $68.75 million still programmed. Federal fiscal year 28, $91.2 million still programmed. Federal fiscal 29, still holding fairly steady at $148.4 million. Federal fiscal 2030, $142.4, and 2031 actually exceeds available funding at $161.4 million. So overall, after these readiness adjustments are taken into account, the total program size that remains across 26 to 2031 is $674.3 million. This leaves, on the next slide, a very large unprogrammed balance. Specifically, we're looking at $57.54 million of unprogrammed balance in the current advertising year, 2026. In fiscal 27, $84.3 million of unprogrammed balance. 28, $64.2 million. 29, $9.5 million. 2030, $13.3 million. A slight deficit of $2.2 million in 2031, though that can be adjusted by recalculating advanced construction timelines for projects. And that therefore means there's an unprogrammed balance of $236.5 million in this tip based on the application of project readiness. Just to wrap up, if we can go on to the next slide, and the one after that, please. I want to note that this is not an action item here today. Rather, this is the baseline. This is the foundation upon which further decisions that are going to be made by this MPO in March are going to build upon. And each of those decisions that the MPO is going to make in upcoming MPO meetings are going to be iterative. So the next meeting of the MPO on March 5th, where we're presenting initial project score, or I should say project scores, will also include requests to start developing the program of projects to review these smaller project changes, those slighter cost increases, some of the smaller size projects that the MPO received applications for, just to begin making easier lower level programming decisions on the program of projects. There are 2 subsequent MPO meetings, though, that will make further decisions for the more complex factors in the program. That's planned for March 19th and also April 2nd. That April 2nd meeting is going to involve the adoption of a final program of projects for the next 2027 to 31 tip. Between each of these upcoming MPO meetings, the TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee is going to meet in those intervening weeks, taking any of the priorities indicated by the MPO board into further discussion, and also trying to resolve any questions that arise during those meetings around specific project changes. This presentation has been about a program overview for the most part, as far as the specific drivers of what is preventing projects from moving forward, what's driving cost increases, what are key challenges, what are key strategies to address this. Those are discussions we're going to start diving into starting next Wednesday at 3 o'clock at that TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee meeting. And that's reflected on this next slide. There are still multiple things and items that this MPO board needs to address, some of which will be at least highlighted or at least those objectives will be discussed further at next week's TIP committee meeting. The first being discussion of those project-specific cost and readiness challenges, but I also want to note that there are still some of those major outstanding program needs to be covered in future MPO meetings, including a TIP amendment for the federal fiscal year 2026 unprogrammed balance. As I mentioned, that's likely March 19th. Candidate projects for balances in other funding years, specifically both projects that have submitted applications for funding already back in the fall and others, board review of project cost increases beyond the threshold set in 2021, and also, again, as I mentioned earlier, potential tweaks to project advanced construction schedules to attain fiscal constraint. Those are the 4 major objectives that staff think will need to be addressed as part of this year's program development. With that, that concludes the information I had here today to present. I am happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Ethan. So does anyone have any preliminary questions? As Ethan said, there's going to be a lot of time to talk over the next month or so. So any preliminary thoughts that folks have now? Leonard.
Yes, a preliminary thought is regarding propagation of delays. So a program will get effectively taken off the tip if the delay goes past 5 years. Right? But let's say we have an initial delay, 4 years, like into 2030. And then we get to 2029, or whatever, or maybe even like next year or 2 years from now, and we see like, oh, they're still not ready, and by our rules, we're going to have to push them out again. We don't have a threshold, for cumulative delays, that essentially will say, okay, you know what, you're on the tip, X years, and now you're like X plus 5 years out cumulatively. We have to like decide what we're going to do, because otherwise, we could just have a propagation of delays. And whereas we're trying to prevent situations where we have a program that gets on the tip in X year, and then 10 years later, it's still on there, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little lost in my question, but my point is that we just don't want to have very long delays, and it doesn't seem like we have a process to actually stop that. Do you come to the same conclusion, Ethan?
What I can say to that is that the objective of the readiness guidelines is to set a floor for a project's programming year. Any further changes back beyond that year based on other project considerations or project-specific nuances, that's still subject to the MPO board to decide on. As a result, this is not removal is not necessarily automatic unless the projects are just not even meeting the minimum threshold for consideration under those guidelines.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Janice?
Yeah. See if I can answer. I think I can phrase the question correctly. What restrictions does the MPO have in spending the unallocated, unprogrammed money for, like, for example, in fiscal 26? What restrictions do we have to spend that money? Does it have to be project dependent? What are the restrictions?
I can only speak to what the MPO has historically conducted. We have specifically in anticipation of this, because a similar amendment was required during last year's TIP development, solicited projects from the MBTA and other partners early to address that. So there are projects that the staff have scored that can utilize this funding from the MBTA, Metro West Regional Transit Authority, Cape Ann Transportation Authority, and also some of the municipalities involved in the collective procurement on blue bikes. As far as other projects beyond that, staff have not currently identified any that fit into that category, though if there are other eligible options, we'll work with MassDOT and other partners to see if they could be funded. Though again, at this stage, staff aren't going to have time to score those options if there's any we haven't received yet.
I guess my question is a little bit more global, is that from a Fed's perspective, what are the restrictions for MPO? Maybe not what we've done historically, but what restrictions does the Feds apply to MPOs to spend down that money? Is it a wider set of funding sources, or is it, what are the restrictions? I'd be interested to see what options we have.
I will say one of the reasons why we're looking to do this as a TIP amendment in March is that certain, especially transit projects, need to have their amendments completed fairly soon. based on federal requirements before sort of the books close on federal fiscal 26. So while there are at times opportunities for flexibility, generally some of the projects we are looking at in some cases are ones that are ready to go out and advertise now, or they are projects that are already in construction, or there's already a contract in place that's scalable, for example, like a bus procurement project that's already underway. Those are usually the ways that we try to be flexible with operating within current federal, at least the federal requirements that I've experienced navigating through this program.
Dennis, does that answer your question?
No, not really, but I may not be phrasing it correctly. I'll take it offline with Ethan. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Schuster?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a crack at addressing Dennis's question since FHWA doesn't appear to be on the call. From what I understand of the question and federal requirements for funding, there aren't any restrictions that FHWA has if the MPO is unable to use its regional target allotment in the federal fiscal year. The regional versus statewide program targets that Massachusetts has are technically a Massachusetts construct, but what is true about the federal funding is that it can lapse if our apportionment goes unprogrammed. So as a Commonwealth, we prioritize funding or apportion funding each year, regardless of whether or not it goes into a region that has the target in the first place. If you don't fully leverage the regional target that's available to you, that funding isn't guaranteed to carry over the following year. It may go toward another priority that happens to be within the region, but on the statewide program, like a bridge or statewide roadway reconstruction project, for example. Just again to make sure that we don't have any of those apportioned funds lapse. I hope that addresses your question a little, Dennis.
Thanks. I don't think I'm asking the question correctly, so I'll just take it offline.
All right, Dennis.
Thanks.
Thanks. Rachel?
Hi, you guys can help me where to put this question. It may be more appropriate for the TIP Readiness Committee. I'm more thinking of, are we taking a survey of kind of what the most common delays are in these projects, and why we are seeing, a decrease in municipal-led projects? Are we sort of taking a holistic approach at that, and how we can maybe look at our process to see how we are not meeting town's needs? So I'm not sure who can answer that, but that's just we see these delays, and I know that I had joined, after, COVID, and we had it seemed like the MPO had some sort of, I don't know, unspoken, but like, okay, we're going to a grace period, and then, which was different from your rules prior to COVID. And then we were trying to get back to rules. So, just wondering if we can take a look at that. It may already be taking a look at too.
So I'll just jump in, Rachel. So I think, in terms of specific projects, you'll really get into the reasons why delays happen in the meeting that Ethan mentioned. I think in general, we're both on at the state level and at the MPO level, we're always trying to make this work better. So there is a lot of attention on this stuff. I know that, did I drop out? Can you guys still hear me?
Hear you.
Yes. Can't see you.
I just got a thing that says, oops, something went wrong. Please close all browsers and rejoin the meeting. And I'm like, oops. Anyways, so I'll keep talking until it kicks me out or whatever. But anyways, there was a discussion in January with all the MPOs and folks from the Highway Division on ways we're trying to deal with this, Rachel. So I think as we get into the meat of the discussions next week and we keep going, I think some of that stuff will start coming to the forefront over the next month in terms of what we're trying to do. But we are trying to always fix this. So,
okay, thank you.
John?
Thanks, Steve. I just had a fast question. Are the towns that are involved in these delays, are they up to date on what's going on, or is that something that we have to bring to them?
Generally speaking, the municipalities are up to date on that, though there are some cases again where, like, for example, some of the project removals, while staff have been reaching out about that, if there is a lack of updates being provided by the municipalities to staff, then there can't necessarily be a reciprocal update in kind, if that makes sense.
No, that does it. As a North Suburban Planning Council, there are a couple of towns involved, so I'll just get in touch with them and make sure they're understanding what's happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Anyone else today? All right. So I think I want to thank Ethan and Adriana for presenting all that. There's a lot to take in. As Ethan alluded to, there'll be plenty of discussions over the next couple of weeks as we try to work through this together. So thank you both, and thanks everyone. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 10, which is member items. Does any members of the MPO have anything to bring to the board? Yes, Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to provide an update on the Third Avenue project. We shared last time that we had a public meeting scheduled for February 11th. We also presented to the Charlestown Neighborhood Council on the 3rd, and then had another daytime meeting at Boston Housing Authority yesterday. I wanted to thank MPO board members and staff that attended those meetings. It was great to see you. For those who couldn't make it, I'm going to share a link in the chat with the presentation, kind of in recognition that our upcoming agendas are packed, and we probably won't have necessarily a time for a full briefing, although we're happy to coordinate something if there's a desire there. The meetings went really well. We had a positive reception for the overall improvements in the corridor, the creation of a street grid that helps reconnect Charlestown, and the ped, bike, and transit improvements. And most of all, people were just really ready to see this project get going, which I know this whole board is, and I certainly am as well. We're going to stay on track to advertise in 2031 as presented in this scenario. We've also briefed Everett, Somerville, and Cambridge on the design, and we'll have briefings coming up with MAPC and Massport, but I wanted to offer that if any other MPO member would like a briefing, I'm happy to schedule something. So thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Anyone else? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn, please? Tom and then Jen.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Tom. Jen?
Second that motion.
All right. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully the storm's not that bad that we all have to deal with this weekend. Everyone be safe, and we'll see you next month. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.